Well, my next guest reminded me of something here, and I want to make mention of this before we get you. There is other news, by the way, besides what happened in Manhattan. I know it's hard to believe, but there are still other things we need to pay attention to. But I do want to emphasize this. Do not fall for the trap. They've laid a trap, has the left. This is part of their plan. Try to get you to do something dumb. Try to get somebody around you to do something dumb, get violent, do something. Oh, look at those right-wingers. Don't do that. Be smart. Be smart. We can still win this thing, but you have to be smart. Don't go off half-cocked. Speak up and be heard, but do it with some conscious forethought, all right? Mark Mix is the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, that is. It has provided legal aid to workers in dozens of cases involving the UAW, including Nissan, North America, Somerset, New Jersey, NTN Bauer, that's Hamilton, Alabama, and a lot of other places. Mark, good to have you on the program.
Steve, good to be with you, and thanks for talking about something else other than the most important news in the country, and that is, an attack on the very structure of who we are and what we do as a democratic republic. I mean, this is an astounding event where the political enemies, politics is a blood sport, Steve, you know that. This is about power and about the exercise of power. And unfortunately, the other side, those Marxist, socialists, leftists, regressives, are very interested in maintaining power, and they can't even contemplate the idea that individual liberty and freedom would be something to be promoted by a government. But yet here we are in a situation where the very foundations of who we are as a self-government experiment is under attack.
It certainly is. And Mark, I appreciate you saying that. Look, you can't have a government where the Supreme Court issues a ruling. I'm using student debt because we're going to talk about universities here in a moment. You can't forgive student debt. You don't have the power to do that as president. And Joe Biden does it anyway. He gives the proverbial middle finger to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, just like the Vatican, doesn't have an army, can't enforce law, no matter what the Pope says or the Supreme Court says. Yeah, that can be their ruling and people can either follow it or not. In America, we always have. Didn't have to like it, but you begrudgingly go along with it. If it didn't agree with you celebrate if you did. And now you've got a president and a political class in the Democrats who ignore the Constitution, who ignore the Supreme Court, who ignore what this country is foundationally. And it's a dangerous time for us, Mark. And I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. Well, indeed, another example of this, Steve, is the Janus decision, the Supreme Court case we won back in 2018 that said before any government entity could take money from a government worker, they had to have an affirmative authorization. But yet state after state, including the state we're going to talk a little bit about today, California, is just ignoring the Supreme Court when it comes to the First Amendment protections for public sector workers across the nation, where in 2018, we won protections against any government employee being forced to pay union dues or fees in order to get or keep a job with government. But yeah, they just ignore it. And that's what's happening again, likely here in California, as we see a whole graduate student system of the University of California potentially walk off campus with about 2 weeks to go in the exam structure.
Explain this. So I'm confused. I'm confused about this case a little bit. Now, having said that, listen, I was a member of the United Auto Workers Union 2 times. Once, I was about 18 years old, I guess. I worked in a factory making wheels for Chrysler automobiles. Okay, that makes sense to me. They had to be in the union. Okay, it was a dirty job, whatever. Paid pretty well at the time I was going to college. The second time, I was a news anchor at an NBC affiliate in central Michigan here. And they came in and unionized the television station, the photographers, the reporters, which made no sense to me. And here you are, my understanding is these graduate students in the University of California system being dictated to by the UAW. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. They're the representative of these graduate students on campus. And not only at the University of Santa Cruz, where we're seeing a walkout based on nothing that has to do anything with the workplace, Steve. This has to do with the encampments, the Hamas encampments, and the boycott, divest, and sanction efforts. And so this is all about the battle over in Israel as opposed to what's happening on the college campus. Steve, the UAW in the University of California system has more members than there are United Auto Worker Union members at GM.
Well, so here's the thing, and that's an important point you've made. And here, I want people to understand what I'm going to say here. In 1979, the UAW boasted 1.9 million members, the majority of which were in auto manufacturing at the Big Three at the time, or the Big Four if I guess AMC was still around then. Today, there are 400,000 members of the UAW. They are a shadow of their former selves. And only about half of those or less are actually working in the auto industry. The rest are at University of California or the TV station I used to work for or whatever it might be. The UAW is scrambling to try to unionize any little shop they can. The burger joint on the corner they'll try to unionize just to get a few more dues in the door. But the UAW is so much less important than it was in 1979 than it is today, and they're desperate for that power, aren't they?
Absolutely, and it's about political power ultimately, Steve. They need the money to be able to support candidates that will maintain their forced unionism privileges. That's what this is all about. It really is very simple. I mean, union officials basically don't represent workers anymore. They represent politicians and political causes. And so this idea of the compulsory dues, which are now back in force in Michigan, your state, and 23 other states across the country, where they can force someone to pay dues or fees in order to get or keep a job. And that power is expanding into the public sector. We know that half of union members in this country right now are government workers. Half of the United Auto Worker members in this country are in the public sector, representing nurses and teachers and others. I mean, it's really about power and it's about money. And that's where this all boils down to. It really does.
Yeah, it certainly does, Mark. And you go to bat for people who don't want to be, kneecapped by unions and forced to pay dues. Sometimes they have to, depending on the state law, but they do have rights, even if there are state laws demanding union allegiance, if you will. Tell the folks where they can find out more about the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation.
Yeah, they can find us on the internet at nrtw.org, nrtw.org. But in this case, those students out there need to know their rights before the strike occurs, because if they cross the picket line, they could be subject to heavy fines by the union. That's what happens if you basically go against the union, you decide you want to go to work, you get fined, you get disciplined by the union. So we're helping. We put out a special legal notice in California to these graduate students, telling them to contact
know your rights.
us.
Know your rights. NRTW.org, NRTW.org. Mark Mix, as always, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
All right. It's the Steve Gruber Show.